نستمع الآن إلى الدكتور عبد المولى الشعار، وهو العضو المنتدب في الأوزا بيزنس سكول. سيتحدث عن منظور أكاديميات الأعمال فيما يتعلق بالمسؤولية الاجتماعية. فليتفضل.
صباح الخير. It's super difficult to talk following someone like Mr. Bedros. We're talking just now about, that thing is on the, I'm just waiting for the presentation. Sorry for that. So we're talking about social responsibility, we're talking about quality assurance and control. The main problem eventually that we have is the fact that there is many definitions of corporate social responsibility. This is one of them, which is adopted by a lot of people. It is the action taken by firms that are voluntary and that have ethical, social, and environmental implication, and that's it. Beginning with that, if we want to do our job, meaning being able to control quality when it comes to social responsibility, we have, of course, to begin by creating and establishing standards to define how things should be done. Then we will have to apply the standards by demonstrating to companies that they have something to lose if they don't apply our standards. If we're good and clever, eventually these standards are going to become norms that will be embedded in our collective mindset. And actually, this is eventually the ultimate objective. To be legitimate, then, firm will have to apply the standards, and we all know that firms that are not legitimate don't live, and ISO especially has completely mastered the process. Today you need to be legitimate in the field. You need definitely some ISO certification to be able, for example, to export your goods. So it seems pretty easy technically, and this is the professor talking. We're talking about normative isomorphism when we are going to set the standard and teach the standard. We are going to talk about coercive isomorphism when we are going to try to find some way to influence people and lead them to apply these standards. And finally, we are going to talk about cognitive isomorphism. It's scientific, we know the process, we know eventually how to apply it. The only problem is that social responsibility, corporate social responsibility, is really a wide and clear concept. We know that we have to look at people, we know that we have to look at profit and eventually planet. It means, and a lot of companies in Lebanon, it means that I'm going to plant a tree, I'm going to actually communicate about my CSR, and then the tree will die and the thing will be done. This is why, eventually, why the famous ISO 26000 is not labeled as being a norm or a quality system, but being a guideline, something eventually that we should follow. Now, if we look at this picture, this is published by ISO. The interesting part is all the things that are around the ISO 20000 logo. It is SDGs, and we know actually how to control and how to measure SDGs. And this actually will shift the notion of CSR, corporate social responsibility, to another notion which is called business for human rights. And there are some difference when you are in CSR, you are trying to do good. When you are in BHR, actually you're trying not to harm. And this can be measured. CSR is a moral rule. BHR is more about legal. CSR is voluntary. It's a voluntary responsibility. BHR should be mandatory, especially for all the people and countries that sign the Human Rights Charter. CSR is a soft law and BHR is a hard law. Then we know also how to implement BHR. We need to set the rules of the game. We need actually attorney bureau to enforce the rules. So you need laws and you need people to enforce the laws. And then you need eventually companies that will implement the rule of the games. And there is that system behind BHR that will eventually force people and force company to implement that. Now the question is, if you don't have a state and if you don't have judiciary, what happens? And fortunately, we Lebanese knows the situation. And when we look at the behavior of some of our companies in Lebanon, we do realize actually that they are breaking the rules of the game. It began with the first flow of Syrian refugees, and then it take all its dimension with the present financial crisis. People are in distress. They need to have an income. They are ready to accept just anything to have the income. And some company, and I'm highlighting some companies, are just doing everything, which is, let's say, not really a proper situation. So what can we do in such a situation? That was actually the reflection, the meeting that we had at ESA at the research center, saying finally there is a loss, there is something which is not really working well. People don't actually feel that they have rights, and they are being abused by a lot of people. So the question was to find someone, something that has influence and that we might eventually influence, and we decided to work on NGOs. NGOs are omnipresent in the country. There is about 10,000 NGOs working. They are just everywhere. Among those 10,000 NGOs, there are some which are pretty good and super NGOs, and there are others, let's say, that are not working that well. And talking with the donors, talking with UNITAR and a lot of people, we realized that there was some donation that were not arriving to Lebanon due to a lack of confidence and trust into NGOs. So we said with the team, fine, let's create some kind of tool, let's create standards, see how we can implement these standards, and eventually we will arrive at a point where all NGOs will behave ethically, following human rights rule, and the population will eventually realize that they have their own rights. And then the reasoning went, if the population feels that it has rights, then it will be difficult for crooked corporation to abuse the people. So that was the plan, and we created that instrument. We are auditing and not assessing, meaning that, fine, you give us data, and we go and check the data. This is one. Second, there are a lot of instruments in the field, locally, regionally, and internationally, looking mainly at governance and finance. We added to that an ethical dimension, a human rights dimension, and a human resources dimension. We wanted also to avoid just snowing NGOs under the demand of information. I saw personally surveys made of 200, 250, 300 questions. Nobody ever will answer that. So we decided, first of all, to divide the instruments, meaning that we know and you know that there are very advanced NGOs in the country, but there are nascent ones working quite well, so we cannot ask the same from a nascent NGO and a mature one. And then we said, fine, we should eventually give time to NGOs to adapt. So what we've done, we created a 3 stages process. The first stage is quite easy to get. The second one, a little bit more difficult. And the third one is a complete one. So this is the first thing that we done. The second thing, we said, fine, they have a lot of work. And eventually, their work on the ground is more important than answering questions. So we create a methodology whereby we do answer a lot of the questions that we wanted to ask out of the analysis of documents. Then we go on site, go on interview, and finally, out of 60 questions, we will need them eventually to answer about 10 or 15 questions. The idea is to ease the process. It could be picture, a little bit like that. We begin by an eligibility assessment, meaning that eventually we want to know with whom we are working, NGO-wise and donors-wise. People are going to inject money into the system. We think that a legitimate question is to ask from where the money is coming. And if it's gray money, eventually we stop the process there. Then our team go on a desk research, meaning that there is a lot of information that we can get out of the internet, just browsing and having information concerning the NGOs. And this fill some of the questions that we want to ask. Then we request documents to continue the process. And finally, we go on site, we audit, verify, go and interview, and finally write the report. When we write the report, we give the report to the NGO and we discuss the report. This instrument is not meant to be somehow a profit-making machine for ESA Business School. Ultimately, what we would like is to give the instrument to a group of NGOs, to some NGOs, in order to have the community taking in charge the instrument, developing and implementing the instrument. Thank you.